Hello everyone, and welcome back to another live stream from the Permaculture Podcast. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, but it's nice to be back with you here on this Tuesday evening. Our subject for the day is focusing on design and the importance of making sure that we're using permaculture design when we're working through our thought and decision-making process. As usual, I don't know how long we're going to be together tonight. I have enough planned for probably 15 or 20 minutes but depending on where your questions and other thoughts take us, we may be here for a while longer. If throughout this, if you're new to a stream or would like to get in touch, feel free if you'd like to. You can email me directly at show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. Easiest way to get in touch with me, I'm usually in email 2 or 3 times a week and try to clear that whenever I am in it. Of course, you can also give me a call, send a text, or WhatsApp to +1 717 827 6266, depending on where you are in the world and what your preferences are. And if you'd like to know about what's going on at the show or behind the scenes, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. Throughout, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will respond as I'm able to. But this interest in looking at design comes from a comment that was made in a live stream chat a while back by Garden of Whedon when they mentioned the technique trap, which is something I'll be covering in an upcoming live stream, and also some conversations that I had with Rosemary Morrow when we were recording the pieces for the podcast series that I'll be releasing documenting her and her life. And that if we take the time to dig in and really focus on our permaculture design from the beginning, that design answers all of our questions down the road. That we will know where resources are coming from, what's available, where they're going, what's going wrong, and that through this permaculture analysis, we can know what we need to do at any point in our design process. And that just as importantly, if we realize that we're trying to answer a question and cannot answer it from what we have available to us, that we should go back to our design and the principles of permaculture and look for where the holes are in our design and be able to fill them in. And that at any point, if we have questions about what we are doing within permaculture as a practice, to revisit that design. And that as we do that and we refine it, that we will continue to close any gaps that we might have in our knowledge or understanding, and as a result be able to dive more deeply into our work as practitioners. And one of the things that comes to mind in this is a lot of times, which, hey Garden, thanks for joining us from Australia this evening. You were part of the impetus for tonight's conversation based on what you had shared about the technique trap. But I often see when I go to permaculture forums on the internet, look at a lot of the material that's coming up at like Our Permaculture in Reddit, many of the conversations are about where do I place an element within my design? And when I see that, I think that it's about that then there's a weakness in our design. That by doing the analysis in the design process, we're going to know all that. So we shouldn't need to wonder where our... Well, V, I will be talking tonight about the importance of design and the need for that focus, but won't necessarily be getting into how to do that. But if you have anything that you'd like me to address in an upcoming live stream, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will get to them in a future conversation, or if they're something I can answer tonight, I will. But where I was thinking about this is when I see questions about what people are planning to plant and where to place them in a design. Where are our cucumbers going to go is one that keeps popping up in my thoughts from seeing that one time. And that by having done a sector analysis of our site, we're going to know where we have an appropriate amount of water for our cucumbers. We're going to know where the sun is on our site in order to help support our cucumbers or any other plants. If we're aware of where we can harvest water from, whether that's from a downspout or a water barrel, or just knowing where the best rainfall is in our area, in our design space, because it's not being covered by a pergola or a tree, that by having done that analysis of our location, we're going to know what resources are available on the ground in our site to answer each of those questions. Similarly, when it comes to our plants and what we want to include, by doing a yields and needs analysis of our plants, that will tell us what resources we have on site that we can take advantage of and know exactly where they're going to go and can place them very quickly and easily within our design. And as I say, if we're having a question about, oh, well, I don't know if it'll get enough sun here, or if the soil is the right type for this plant, then we should loop back in and check our design. Have we done a soil analysis to know what kind of soil is where and what the nutrients are that's available? If we live in an area that has particular pests, then are we trying to force something into our system that shouldn't necessarily be there? I think about when I was still on the land and how we were really susceptible to powdery mildew and had problems with, I forget the name of the potato pest in the moment that can come through, but we had issues with potatoes being wiped out. And so being aware of that, not trying to force something like potatoes or squash into that setting, and was something that I had to consider. I then look at, spelt grew really, really well because I had some super poor soil that I was trying to improve, and I could grow that on the land that I had available to me fairly easily. And that's where I just really feel that design is a super important piece of the work that we're doing, and that too often the Permaculture Design course has become less than that we're not talking about design. In an interview with Dave Jackie, he had mentioned that he didn't really learn design in his Permaculture Design course. And I can see how that could be the case based on my own PDC experience, as well as the conversations that I've had with others. And so it's part of my interest as a permaculture educator to make sure that we're really digging deeply in these kinds of analyses early on in the conversation. And between, Garden, what you were saying about the technique trap, and then the conversations with Rosemary Morrow about what the framework of a PDC can really look like these days, is part of why I've kind of reworked the Permaculture Design course into these two separate units of ecological literacy and design, and then the practicum, is so that we can dig really deeply into starting with the landscape, knowing where our design site is, looking at the resources that are available from the outside that we can bring in, as well as what the negative impacts might be. Being able to be aware of everything that could happen from water quality. If we have an old metal roof that has begun to peel. What might be coming off of that roof? What are the places where we can get soil tests done relatively inexpensively? Where can we get water tests done? What are all the resources that we need as permaculture practitioners that we can bring to bear to our design process? And then be able to continually apply that in what we're developing. And then by using that knowledge and getting really deep into design in the landscape, that we can apply that to other areas and different resources. And again, we can be checking the appropriateness of certain techniques that we're really fascinated by. Like getting to build my first herb spiral was a cool experience, and it's really neat to do that kind of hands-on work. Or helping someone to build a dry stone foundation for a cob oven, and being able to work with some people to learn about what is necessary to build cob and where we could harvest those materials on site when we were at a festival, and built that together. When I was working with the folks from The Push, when I was down visiting them, helping them build out a cob oven and learning about that experience, and knowing that, cob may be difficult to build if we have really sandy soils or don't have the right clay content, or if we do have the right soil, what do we need to use to bring in? And that by focusing on design, we can build out the list of all of the resources that are around you, and bring it together. And garden, Mark Kralchek. Oh, did you ever listen to my interview with Mark? It's been a long time since he was on the show. I think that the book that he'd started with Dave Jackie on coppicing is out later this year, which I've really been looking forward to. And you say that the design process increases the chances of not failing because you are considering the main factors. No design is final, it is responding. And that's something that I would certainly agree with, particularly the responding part, and is where I feel that we can work on designing out the designer. It's something that my teachers in my teacher training talked about, and that there's this ideal here of creating these self-managing systems, but I don't know that that's something necessarily worthwhile. Yeah, it's probably been 6 or 7 years since Mark was on the show. If you don't find it, let me know and I can drop it somewhere. But that's where the conversation with Rosemary and her big push for design really sparked something in my thoughts about that we don't necessarily know, we can't respond to everything, and we can't be omniscient. When we're looking at ecology and everything that's going to happen in the world around us, there's just so much, and there's a complexity there that we can't know, but can certainly do our best to plan for. And that's where I think the revisiting of the design comes in, and it fits with some of what David Holmgren spoke to with our, small and slow solutions, accepting feedback and responding to change, that if we have questions that arise, that these processes that we have can help us go back to our design and our work and fill in the gaps, narrow the places where we don't have good knowledge, and in doing so be able to make better and better decisions. But it's, when I was on the landscape, we had what were thought of as 100-year floods. And they were pretty bad, but it was something manageable. And so used that information to design around it. And then a much worse flood came a few years later and wiped out part of our garden. And I moved from an in the ground, larger garden in the yard that we had available, to moving much of the garden into the front yard, because that was a place where flooding just really couldn't happen. without, wiping out the house and everything else there. Like, it would have gone from bad to truly catastrophic. But, I used all the information that I had available. And then once I had new information, went back, revisited the design, filled it in, and said, okay, now that I have this new knowledge of flooding, what do I do? Similarly, there were some high-tension power lines that came over that property, and it was something that was never really addressed or something that we had to worry about, and just planted trees and did what we did. But then the power company decided several years after some plantings that they needed to come through and clear based on their right-of-way, and came in and dropped a number of very large trees. Thankfully, it was nothing that I had planted as part of my permaculture design per se, but they were some things that I had designed around. And then there was a human element that came in that I wasn't aware of either. And then, they gave us all the information about what we could grow, how big it could be, and I was able to come back in and again revisit that design and go, okay, what do I do with this space now? How do I use it differently based on this new information? Similarly, I think if I were going to come back in and decide or be looking at something that I want to plant, asking myself, how does this change what I've already done? And again, revisit. And that's why I'm also a big fan when it comes to permaculture as a practice, incremental design. There's the Philadelphia Orchard Project, which has a bunch of people whose work I love very much, or like the work of Michael Judd in, edible landscaping with a permaculture twist. He talked a lot about starting small. As far as the Philadelphia Orchard Project was concerned, one tree could be an orchard. And they would do everything they could to plant that tree well, and then, prepare around it, because they were permaculture folks, how best to support that tree. And so it's tying all that together and doing something small, doing the best that I can in the moment, and then coming back and revisiting it later, trying something different as time goes on, taking one tree, adding another, adding some bushes, some mushrooms and things like that, and continuing to move it out and see how that changes. And that's also why, from a permaculture perspective, I think of the zone models as also my places to start. And so zone 1 is just my starting place. Like, once I know that my home and everything there is taken care of, if we want to talk about zone 0 or zone 00, I'd be happy to throw that into a future conversation, another stream. But from a landscape-based practice, I always like to start with zone 1, because that is the place where I am the most comfortable to make large changes. So if I need to build raised beds, whether that's on the ground with some wood around it so that I have some planting depth, or if I need to actually build raised planters that are, waist high, that allow me to plant in 8 or 10 inches, then, that's something that I can do in that space as well. Or where I would be most comfortable bringing in large quantities of earth, compost, do a lot of soil building directly, because I pull from a lot of writers who are talking about getting our food secure. And so if we're on the land and able, then growing as many calories as we can. And generally, I find that the Zone 1 garden is the best place to do that, because we can start with plant starts, we can grow from seed. There are lots of options that we can get going within one growing season while we build out our other zones. And that also gives us more time as permaculture practitioners, that idea of observe and interact, that by starting in zone 0, by starting in zone 1 with a garden, it gives us more time to observe those things that may be pieces that we're not aware of, that we may not find for 5, 7, 10 years. And so, going slow and starting with certain things that are really meaningful to us, and in those close zones, allow us to work out from there. And again, our design can help us decide where those best spaces are going to be. Let me hop into the chat real quick If you've got any questions, feel free to share them now. I'm going to check in over here real quick, and then we will continue. So, Garden, you're saying that unfortunately weather has been getting so extreme in Australia that 1 in 1,000-year floods in the last few days, that some places were getting 27.9 inches in 24 hours, and massive wildfires in recent years, and that it's hard to design for these extremes, and some people might have to relocate. And that's similar to what I was saying a little bit ago about what is appropriate, that these kinds of analyses can help us to decide whether on what we can do with where we are. I can't say that I've experienced those kinds of extreme weather events. That's a whole lot of rain. Like where I've generally lived most of my life here in the eastern United States in Appalachia, 45 to 50 inches of rainfall equivalent a year is what we could expect. I've had a couple of rainstorms that dropped, more than an inch an hour, but those have been only a couple. And that's, if we're going to look long term when it comes to climate change, I think it's something we have to consider. It's part of the conversation that I had with Rosemary Morrow, and what she raised was, what about folks who are in low-lying areas and permaculture for those people who are there? What about permaculture at the oceans and the coasts, and what can we do to be protecting our waterways and restoring those? And I don't have answers at the moment, because the knee-jerk response is, well, those people are just going to have to move. And I understand that relocation is certainly part of the conversation, but given how many people live at, within a meter or 10 meters of the ocean or of water, that's a lot of people to move. And I can definitely see the possibility of climate refugees. I mean, we have them now, V, you say that the sun's angular elevation at different times of year for your site. How do you translate that into where the sun won't shine? Or do you have a source to recommend to figure that out? Peter Bain's Permaculture Handbook has the best description I've found for that, because he pretty clearly details how you find your maximum and minimum sun angle, and then you can use that to calculate how far shadows will be cast by buildings and different structures that are on your site, trees, like anything else. If you know what its height is and what the sun's angle is, you can figure all that out. I don't, off the back of, in the moment, Peter Bain's book is the one that I would recommend, because once you have that maximum and minimum figure, you can calculate a lot of that out. Let me also check. I used to have a write-up for that. And it's something that I can do. So if you want to pick that up, that would be the place that I would start. The ebook for that is fantastic if you have an e-reader. And it's, I think when I picked up the ebook, it was like $10 compared to the print, which was a good bit more. But that's fascinating. If you don't want to do that, then let me put together a future live stream. I can go back and pull Peter's book, calculate that out, and then show you how some of those calculations would work, and actually put together some graphics that I can throw up on screen to help you calculate that and figure out and figure out some of those formulas based on height and things like that. Okay, you have his book. Yeah, I don't recall where that is, but yeah, I remember that being pretty clear. Anyway, I can look it up and get you more information. I don't know if Rosemary Morrow has that either. Yeah. Then let me, I will put down a sun analysis as a future, or a solar analysis as a future live stream topic. I'm still filling out like the catalog of what these will be, and so am looking for suggestions. So yeah, I will toss that on there. And yeah, Garden, with your experience and all the folks who you're in touch with, I don't know if you have any thoughts or suggestions on some of those issues either when it comes to the possibility of people needing to relocate. I mean, here in the United States, the century-long forecast is saying that if you're not at least as far north as Maine, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable. I'm still waiting to see how that plays out and impacts water flows and things like that. I know that, well, winters here in outside the United States capital are not as cold and blustery as they used to be, and that's been pretty interesting to experience. Even though this was the first year where we were below 20 degrees Fahrenheit in I think 5 or 6 years, if I recall the statistics properly. I know more like long term, my wife and I are looking to go to Pittsburgh, which will take us a good bit further north, but that's still based on current climate migration. You know, we're only looking at a decade or two of additional time versus where we are now, and there's a lot of number crunching that I have to go through to look at what's going on there and just see. I think that I am still in love with permaculture and continue this practice and all my work with it because it's the only solution that I've seen so far to many of these big questions that we are that we are facing currently and will face in the future, and give us the ability to look at what's happening, how they can happen over time, and give us options for what we can do. And I'm not totally without hope that many of these forecasts of what will be of the areas that will be uninhabitable, that will actually be the case if we put these ideas in practice. With all of the information that's come out of Australia, that could be used in places that are getting warmer. All the information and research that folks are doing in the tropics, as we can press that out. But it's a lot. I just look at it and I think that there is so much going on that for us to consider, and what we can look at. And so, Garden, you're saying water influences 70 to 95% of the Earth's heat dynamic. You're excited by the possibility of regenerative ag and rehydration. Yeah, if you're interested, definitely send me an email about it. I've got some pieces that I've been working on from Eric Tonesmeyer that looks at what can be done with regenerative ag and alley cropping and some of these other techniques that I'm really interested and fascinated by, and look forward to being able to share with the audience here in the future. I am taking a little bit of a break from the podcast proper right now. If anybody's a patron, then you know what's going on for some of my recent weekly updates. Had some family emergencies, so I need to step back and focus on some other things right now. But looking at doing more of these live streams in the weeks ahead, to be able to continue to share ideas, thoughts, and information, and continue the dialogue while I'm not releasing that material at the moment. But yeah, I'm really interested in how all of these techniques can make a really big difference. Looking at the work of somebody like Jeff Speck and what he shares in Walkable City, which I highly, highly recommend. Okay, V, thank you for letting me know. I will double check that, and I'll also double check my feed to make sure that those are available. My podcast plugin for WordPress may be broke, and I just didn't see it. But yeah, I will bring that up. I am also looking to convert most of the archives to YouTube over time. Regretfully, I lost my masters when a hard drive failed, along with a a lot of documents and a lot of resources that I compiled over the years. Not only did the hard drive that all those were stored on fail, when I went to recover my backup, I found that that was also unrecoverable. And yeah, there's a lot of material there that I'll be recreating over time, or using the pieces that are already up on the website, or I've been able to download to recreate a bunch of that. But yeah, I'll be putting more of those up here on YouTube in the time ahead. Though, of course, there's like 600 or more episodes, I think, now in the archives. Last time I did a full count, some of those aren't publicly available due to some licensing issues, but I may be able to remix those or re-record them to get them out. But yeah, there's a lot out there, and I think I've only got like maybe 10% of those up here on YouTube. But yeah, I will double check my player. Thank you for letting me know. Where was I? Yeah, I look at the work of Jeff Speck with like Walkable City and Walkable City Rules, and what we can do right now to make cities incredibly more enjoyable for everybody who lives there by planting street trees. Like, there's all this stuff that we can do to make the world that we live in right now even more beautiful and inhabitable. And so why not go ahead and do that now, because it helps us mitigate all of these other issues. And then as permaculture practitioners, though our conversation starts in the landscape, we're also community focused. So if we're in a place that gets super hot, what about working with our local municipality to make sure that there are cooling centers open and available, any time that the temperature rises above a certain, anytime that the temperature rises above, whatever that wet bulb value is, like 85 degrees Fahrenheit, that we open up cooling centers, whether that's a community center or a library, but something that's, no questions asked. If we're activists, then what can we do to get, cold fluids into people's hands? The idea of community fridges, which I've recorded an episode with Taylor Scott about, which will be out later this year. What if we have community fridges as permaculture practitioners that are tied to solar, so that if the grid goes down, that fridge is still cold, and we can be putting supplies in there for people in our community to have available to them. Not necessarily bottled water that people would take with them, but having containers that we're able to fill up from our sink or a sustainable water source and allow people to tap from. And again, doing our design and looking at our community as a design space, we can look at where we can find this information, where these resources are available. As we think about the projects that we want to engage in and how we want to practice permaculture in our lives and in our world, we can make some really meaningful changes for lots of people, and do it now before the worst impacts hit, so people know where these resources are in the future. As I kind of spitball this right now, if we have a community fridge that we're putting these kinds of supplies and resources in, that we might have a whiteboard on it where we can write useful information, or to have a place where we can slip in a sheet that says, hey, now that summer's here, here's where you can find a cooling center. If the community fridge is empty, here's where the local community pantries are. Here are organizations that you can call if you need assistance with something, and continue to build out that network. One of the other things that really appeals to me as a permaculture practitioner is that it's so much bigger than just ourselves. And the more that I talk with folks who have been in this for a long time, that the narrative of what Bill and David originally set forth was missed for a while. And I recently was gifted David Holmgren's collected works, and I'm looking forward to going back through there and pulling some of this information that I'm fairly certain is there, and be able to share it with you so that we have a better idea of the broad arc of permaculture beyond just the landscape. Having talked with people like Joel Glansberg, who was in the first or second class with Bill Mollison in the United States, that the early PDC was for professionals, people who were landscape architects, and how to apply this in the landscape. Talking with David about how it was originally seen as a series of permacultures rather than this big arcing single idea of permaculture, and how all that ties together in the choices that we can make as practitioners to not only take the radical step of growing food, which is super important, and I should probably do a small space live stream sometime to talk about growing in pots and things like that for folks like myself who are in cities, in an urban environment, don't have access to much land, that it is still, even if it's just a single tomato plant and a couple of herbs, incredibly powerful and meaningful to do that. And we can apply permaculture design to that process to know where to place them, whether it's indoors, outdoors, do an analysis of our plants that we want to grow, an analysis of the people and animals in our lives. If we have a cat that happens to really like to chew on a house plant, then maybe our growing room needs to be a place that is shut off from them. And yeah, just the way that doing that work, even if it is just one plant, one room, one life, that it informs so much of what we're capable of and what we can do. So popping back over to the chat, that must have been very stressful. It's, as someone who spent a decade in IT and did everything that I was supposed to, and did everything right, ran regular backups, checked my backups, went in to replace that hard drive as soon as it started to fail, and just lost so much. And trying to backtrack through the website and find certain things. The hardest part with losing a lot of that isn't the documents, because a lot of that can be recreated, but my masters, and having all of that audio from the show that existed in a form that I could go in and easily pull out my intro and ending, pull out the theme for the show, and then be able to record new intros and endings and rework all that material is probably the part that was the hardest about losing all that. Because it's gone. And I have no way to get that back. So just have the MP3s. Have you considered interviewing Nikki and Dave Schauder of Permaculture Gardens? I am not familiar with them. The pandemic has limited my connecting with people who are local, and I've just really started to do that in the last 6 months or so, starting first with the folks at Future Harvest and getting to know the permaculture practitioner, or the sustainable farmers in the area. And as part of my interest in being able to go out and shoot video with people and show what these practices look like, in order to show what regenerative agriculture looks like in practice. But there's certainly somebody who I will put on my list. Let me actually go ahead and cut and paste that from the chat real quick. I will look them up and see what they're doing. I'm also in touch with Lincoln of forested.us. He's a little bit away he's just over in Maryland, about a half an hour or so from here, and is someone who I'm in touch with to go visit here in the near future. I also want to reconnect with Lee and Dave O'Neill, who are out in Western Virginia. I think they're like an hour and a half from here, but there are a number of folks who are on my list. I'll also be heading to North Carolina at the end of this month, now that case numbers are dropping in the United States. And then I'll be visiting with Drew. Of course, in the moment, I'm blanking on Drew's work, but Drew and his wife Lacey are in Eastern North Carolina. Going to go down and visit them I'll be there with them for like day and a half, 2 days, shoot some video on their site and talk with them about their work. Then I'll be heading to Asheville, North Carolina, looking to connect with Natalie of Wild Abundance, though she's been on the show before. Want to record a new interview with her in person to explore what she's doing to teach women's carpentry classes and doing natural building and sharing a lot of that, because those are skills that I think will be really essential in a changing world. There's this conversation that I've had with my friend Jason Godesky about having a world where our tools last for generations, but if we don't maintain our houses, they disappear within one. We've also joked sometimes about this idea of wigwams with Wi-Fi and wanting to keep the ability to communicate as we're able to now, but otherwise greatly reduce the impacts that we have on the world around us. And yeah, I just see natural building as a super useful part of that. And also because of how many of those skills allow us to be owner builders or, owner maintainers, that by understanding thatching and all these other technologies, we can repair something if the world as we know it is no longer as it is today, as we've noticed with a bunch of the shortages and things throughout the pandemic, with vehicles and some of these other pieces, and how quickly the world around us can change. It's even like one of my favorite toolkits I have behind me here on my bookshelf are my napping tools. And it's one of my favorite skills to have learned, was how to turn the detritus of civilization into useful tools from, I love taking a toilet tank lid, that big rectangular piece of porcelain, breaking that and turning it into blades that you can use to cut all kinds of things, even to make axes, and learning a lot of those skills. And I don't know if it's still, it would be years back in my Instagram account for the podcast, but making my son a tomahawk out of, or no, not a tomahawk, but a hand axe out of some tool materials that we had around us. Now, it wasn't a functional edge, but modeling that with resources that I was able to harvest from my yard or had available around me. All the bows that I've made over the years, and arrows and arrowheads, having those kinds of skills, but then the way that those relate to what I do right every day. All of the containers that I've fixed over the years by understanding lacing, or how to cut or create cordage from materials that are around me, whether that's a hide that I'm sitting there with a blade and I'm cutting exactly the width of a leather thong that I need for something. I used to be a whip maker many, many years ago. I made bull whips and stock whips and learned how to hand cut lace doing that, or to split lace. And those skills combined with some of these other pieces, knowing what plants are in my area that I can create cordage with, being part of the butterfly migration. Milkweed is one of the things that I absolutely love for making cordage. I think it's dog bing is one of the others that are really easy to use. There's the I really need to go look and see if Bob Tice is still around, because my interviews with him are some of the ones that still stand out as some of my favorites, because of what he talked about when it comes to being able to restore and rehabilitate the places that we're already in, rather than building from new. As someone who pushes back against the fast fashion industry, knowing how to choose garments that will last for years and be repairable. Right now I'm working with someone on a coat who is a garment maker and, union card-carrying member of the garment workers union and has an MFA in costume, and I'm having them make me some clothing that I can rely on and depend on for years, and doing it in such a way that, because I know I don't have those sewing skills, that it is assembled so that if it's missing a button, I can replace it. If a seam tears, how do I get to it to fix it? And a bunch of other things. It's really made me reconsider the resources that I bring into my life and what I use. There's like many of the books behind me. You'll see right here, I have some of my role-playing books, and over here I have some, still weird to point on camera, some of my permaculture books, like building an offline library is really important. And it's been a large part of filtering through what matters and what is meaningful in order to determine and decide what I bring in and what I want to keep. And there are lots of resources that I think are great for someone who is new to permaculture to get them started, but aren't things that I would hold on to after I've read that initial knowledge and gained some understanding from them. Some things popping up. Garden, you say, yes, supply chain issues, repurposing and building, great stuff. It's just one of those things. I grew up with a family where my grandfather built houses for a living. Even though he had a farm, like that's where he made his money, was as a developer and a builder. And that's what my dad was trained to do before he left for the Navy. And so my father is a very skilled carpenter, everything from fine to rough. He could build a house and then, turn you the dishes that you'll eat on the table that he built, if need be. My stepfather is also a builder and was in the building trades for 20 years before he went and became a pipe fitter, and then recently retired from that work. And learning at their, I don't want to say knees, because my stepfather didn't come into my life until I was an adult, but being able to learn at his side about like what he recommends and what he doesn't. Being handed a torch and some copper fittings and some solder, and just learning how to do that work. Do I feel super comfortable with it? Oh no. Do I think if I had to solder up some lines that there would be some issues and some leaks? Probably. But I find that it's not necessarily about being able to do it well, but having an understanding of how to do it that I can at least try. I don't have to necessarily call somebody in for something like that. I enjoy the conversations with my wife when I go in and I work my way through, and it's like clearing a drain or fixing our toilet. Even though we live in a complex with maintenance, sometimes it can take a day or two for them to come out. And so there's all kinds of stuff that I just do around the house because it's what I do. And it goes back to reskilling. And I think, again, when it comes to design, being able to do a deep permaculture design that starts in our landscape and works outward from there, into our home, into our lives, out into our community, out into the lives of the folks around us, that we can understand where we can fit and what our roles might be, and go from there. The other V, you say, have I read Building Your Permaculture Property? That's actually not one that I know. I'll have to look that up. I get around 100 books a year from various authors and publishers, and so I don't tend to go out and look for things anymore. They kind of come into me, and that's more than I can often sort through. But I will look that up. Actually, while I'm here, let me see if I know the author and if I have any thoughts from there. Oh, yeah, Michelle and Rob and Dakota. Rob has been on the show individually. I've had Rob and Dakota on, I think at least twice. I am not familiar with their book, nor have I read it, but I have a lot of respect for them in particular, and would feel comfortable recommending it just knowing who wrote it. But I cannot speak more deeply to your question of the strengths and weaknesses of the content of the book. If it's based on what I think it's based on from talking with them, yeah, I would say that it's probably, sight unread, I would say that it is probably a pretty good book with a lot of useful information. But I will see about picking up the ebook, or who published that? It looks like it's part of the Mother Earth News Wiser Living series. I have contacts at New Society, so I'll reach out to them and see if they can send me an ebook, and I'll check it out and let you know and give you a better answer. But yeah, just knowing that it's from them, I would feel comfortable recommending it. There are only a handful of authors in the permaculture community who I feel comfortable recommending sight unseen, and they're one of those sets of folks. Their knowledge is there, their skill set's there, and I feel that they're pretty good about being clear about what they do and what they are and aren't aware of, and speak to their strengths. But yeah, I'll definitely dig into that. I don't know how that didn't show up on my radar last year when it came out. Looks like it's been out for almost a year. But yeah, I'll definitely dig into that because that's one that I'd love to go through. Part of this like short break that I'm on right now, or I shouldn't say short, it is somewhat indefinite until I work some things out and lower some stress and anxiety in my life. So I'm looking for more books to review, short material to dig into, as well as conversations, material to cover for live streams. And that the books like that are certainly ones that I could get into, or do live streams on some books that I recommend around certain topics. So if you're looking for reading around anything in particular, certainly let me know and I can go through that. Dan and I are in touch. I actually have some material V you're saying about Dan Palmer, and then I'll get back to your question about books to recommend for learning lost skills. Dan is working on some stuff. That's all that I will say for now. I am aware that is happening, and he's in it, and we have about an hour and a half or 2 hours of material that we recorded together near the end of last year to talk about design process and what design means to each of us, that I'll be releasing as a longer episode. And then we kind of hash through a couple of questions that are ones that arise in our permaculture practice. But yeah, Dan's doing some great stuff, and I'm really, really happy to call him one of my colleagues and work with him. Really a great guy, really like his work. And definitely one who I would recommend when he releases things. Books to recommend for learning lost skills. A lot depends on what lost skills you're thinking of or have in mind. Let me pull it up. Being a techie, so many of my books are ebooks these days, and so I can't just like reach out or go to my shelves and just say, oh, here's the thing, and like show it up real quick. But yeah, I was involved in experimental archaeology when I was in college, which is where I found a lot of interesting folks. I dislike some of the titles of some of these books that are out there these days because, yeah, I just... But one of the books that I really enjoyed was Primitive Skills and Crafts, An Outdoorsman's Guide to Shelters, Tools, Weapons, Tracking, Survival, and More by Richard and Linda Jameson. One that I really liked. There's also, I'm trying to think, Primitive Technology 1 and 2 by David Westcott. I think one is... What is it? Let me go look those up real quick. Yeah, the first one is A Book of Earth Skills. The second is Ancestral Skills from the Society of Primitive Technology. Most of the stuff that came out from the Society of Primitive Technology I really enjoyed. When it comes to like basket weaving and tracking and flint knapping and things like that. I learned a lot of that, as I say, when I was in college, and I was just sitting with a professor who, made his own knives and arrowheads out of obsidian, and so learned a bunch of stuff. But yeah, David Westcott is probably the author who I'd recommend first and foremost. Westcott is Wescott. I find that though the books were written a number of years ago, they are done from a place of respect, which you don't necessarily see in all the material. When it comes to the prehistoric skills, and a lot of those books that are out there. But yeah, I really David Westcott was pretty good. I'd also recommend checking out the work of John Young. I know he's more of a tracker these days, but he's involved in a lot of different things that I appreciate and respect. But yeah, if there are any particular specific skills that you have in mind that come up for your grandson or anybody else in your family, let me know. I've got tons and tons of stuff that I can look into that I've read or worked with or know somebody who I can point you towards. Though I am not a primitivist anarchist, I have a lot of friends who are, and people who are in the rewilding community that I can lean into for resources if it's something that I haven't experienced. I feel fortunate that I spent time in a Boy Scout troop that was very big on a lot of those skills, and so got to sit at the feet at people who were renowned foragers and who shared a lot of information with me as a teenager, that stuff that I still really enjoy and loop back to. And so there's a lot of that. It may not be the most recent writings, but I can certainly suggest the things that I enjoy and I'm comfortable with and find out more. Yeah, I think it covers everything in the moment. I will also, if anything else comes to mind, I think you are a patron, so I can also drop you a direct message with some of that information on Patreon, and share that with you. But now that we started, and I thought I had 15 minutes of material, but I've now covered an hour. If you have any questions before we draw this to a close tonight, if you want to go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I can address those before closing out tonight. If you've been with me through all of this and you'd like to get in touch, or as I say, suggest anything for a future live stream or something to cover, a book to review, shorter material, or there's just any way that I can help you on your permaculture journey, feel free to drop me an email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. I think long after I have retired and am no longer producing the show, this address will be out there in the world, and it will be my children or a listener who has taken over this email account and still gets in touch with me so that I can keep responding to messages. But yeah, regardless of what happens to the show in the future, if for some reason I leave the podcast at some point in time, my intent is still to leave this email address out there and the archives available so that they are free for people to always have access to it. And I will continue to monitor the email address as long as I can and continue to respond to questions. That is not in any way to indicate that I am planning any changes to the show, just that, yeah, this email address will probably outlive me if you ever want to get in touch. Similarly, feel free to call, text, or WhatsApp me directly, 717-827-6266. For call or text, if you want to WhatsApp, +1 717-827-6266. That is my line for the podcast and where I've been for a long time. Always feel free to get in touch there. And if you'd like to join the Patreon community where I'm posting weekly updates, AMA threads, short articles, and all kinds of other stuff, you can find that at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. I'll be there for a while. I'm going to see about hosting another one of these midweek next week, shooting for probably 3 p.m. on Thursday, March 10th, 3 p.m. Eastern, to have a conversation about the professional practice of permaculture, and then another one the week after. So that would be Tuesday, March 15th at 8 p.m. If you're here and would like to join me, I don't know what those topics will be, but can certainly, I'll post something to the permaculturepodcast.com/calendar. I'll update that with those dates and the topics I'm going to cover. Yeah, I think that covers everything that I had in mind for today. Thank you for everybody who joined me for the conversation and sharing your thoughts. I really enjoy these, and that's why I want to do some more while I'm taking a bit of a break from the other pieces. Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun. So thanks for joining me and being a part of this. And yeah, we'll do this again soon. And as always, until the next time, spend each day focusing on your design while taking care of Earth, yourself, and each other.